Hello and welcome to Unacademy. As part of your Hindu analysis today, we'll be discussing 6 to 7 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. It's good to be back and I hope that all of you are doing well. Now, before we begin, as always, a very important announcement for you that the 24,999 offer is going to end very, very soon and there is going to be a 10% hike coming in the coming weeks itself. So if you have ever thought of getting a guided understanding of UPSC, or if you've ever seen any form of value addition in your UPSC journey and you've considered Unacademy, this is the right time. For 15 months, 2499, 24,999 is one of the best prices which is being offered by anybody in the market as of right now. So in this you will also get plus course access, GS, CSAT and test series and unlimited access to all batches. Sarmat sir has just recently, yesterday, started his polity batch in the evening. So I hope that you have become a part of it. If you haven't, his polity batch has started yesterday. Still only one class gone. You should become a part of this batch from 25th June. So I hope that you've actually considered us for your preparation. With this, let's enter into the topics we are going to cover. Eight good articles based on GS paper 2, 3 and 1, and more than that, some smaller minor points related to history, geography and polity along with the concept of economics. So first, we'll talk about Kavach. This has been in the news quite a lot now because of the railway accidents. Then Maharashtra's water crisis with the Marathwada area now being declared as a drought-prone area, and the government just recently said that it is now under drought. This becomes an important topic. Thereafter, we'll talk about the Agnipath and the Agniveer scheme. Is there a need to revamp it? What are the different recommendations? Thereafter, we'll go into a concept which has been proposed, which is national security strategy. Then a feature which I always take, which is from the archives, and this time we get a glimpse into the integration of Sikkim and a very interesting newspaper article which came in 1974. Then we'll move towards the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Why is there a need to revamp it? Then Moody's, what we call as credit profiling, and the Baa3 status which has been given to us. And last but not the least, a Chinese probe which has returned back with rocks from the moon, but it has a very interesting place in our what we call as lunar exploration and generally in the larger story of science and technology. So we'll discuss this also. In all these topics, I have given you mains question wherever possible, and we will discuss a question related to prelims here, for which the answer will be given tomorrow and you will give the answer in the chat box. So with this, let's begin our analysis. The first topic is related to Kavach. Now, the exact terminology for Kavach actually is the concept of ATP system. It's an ATP system, which is automatic train protection system. We have named it Kavach. And in the context of what happened last year in Orissa and the recent Kanchenjunga Express accident which happened in West Bengal, Kavach has come into the focus quite a lot. Wherein if Kavach was there in either of the trains, which is the Orissa accident or the West Bengal accident, in either of the trains, if Kavach would have been there, the accident could have been avoided, at least in West Bengal case for sure. In Orissa, it was a signaling error and therefore the speed at which it happened, the Kavach program may not have covered it. However, West Bengal is a classic case of how two trains collided with one another in a way of actually not knowing the right signal, and over and above that, they had no idea what is the distance between them. Wherein Kavach is actually geared for something like this. Now, before I go into the article itself, this is the Kavach dashboard which is in front of the driver. Before we go into the data and the idea of focus and finance, let's try to understand what is Kavach properly. Because Kavach can come in the news now because of the fact that multiple newspapers, multiple channels have covered this aspect. Why is it that it could prevent something like this? And more than that, what is the concept itself? So let's look at Kavach in that regard. Now see, Kavach has three basic components. There is one which is called trackside. The other one which is at the station. and the next one is on the train itself. There are three components: the first, the second, and the third. The first component, and I'll explain this diagram to you. The first component is that in the train itself, there's a dashboard. There's a dashboard and there's a Kavach system, which is signaling system. And there is something called an RFID reader. You have used an RFID, mostly what are called NFC tags you used, which is basically if you have a RFID reader and an RFID, if you connect with them, they basically have a certain form of encoding and they can take the code from the RFID reader from the RFID itself. So there's an RFID reader here, Kavach signaling system, and a dashboard. On the tracks, you need the RFIDs itself, and in the station, you need one Kavach main system itself along with a tower which can connect to the train Kavach signaling system. So basically, there is an onboard component. There's an onboard component wherein the operator come in what you call indication panel, which is a dashboard, along with two antennas, one for GPS for the location of the train itself and the other one for signaling in that regard, which is through the radio antenna connected to the same TCAS system, traffic collision avoidance system, and you need RFIDs on the tracks itself. Now what the concept is, when the train is moving along the tracks itself, the RFID reader keeps on reading the RFID tags which are on the track. And therefore, firstly, as soon as it reads, this system gets to know that the train has crossed that section of track itself. And more than that, this RFID is fed with the concept of what we call as the basic information of what is the signal. What is the signal is actually fed into this RFID. So therefore, the train autonomously, that is why it is called automatic, autonomously is first sending the location of the train itself. Second, reading the signal before it is reaching the signal post itself. And third, it is also telling the location of the train. Now what happens if there are two trains on the same track, the RFID tags can figure out the distance between them, and if two trains are heading towards each other, what will happen is the dashboard will say that there is, for example, 1 kilometer distance between both the trains, and it will give a warning to the driver, which is that on the same track there are two trains. If the driver fails to apply the brakes, the system itself applies the brakes to the locomotive, and therefore it is an anti-train collision system wherein you cannot just rely on the driver. If the driver has ignored the basic signaling, the train itself will stop itself. So they will basically stop at a safe distance, and both because they know each other's locations and the location on track is also known. This is how this whole system works. So there is three components, as I said. One, the station Kavach unit, RFIDs on the track, and a radio tower for communication. On the other hand, you have the loco Kavach unit, which is interacting with the radio and the station unit itself. Then you have the driver interface, which actually is quite interesting because it shows the speed but also shows the signal. Because this is very, very interesting for foggy or bad weather wherein you can't see the signal. So the RFIDs give the signal on the dashboard. On this they can see the signal what has been given by the station, and therefore there's no need for physical or visible signaling in that regard. And therefore the RFID reader, the RFID interact, radio tower unit links both of them, and the driver has all the information in front of him. Now if the driver fails to put in the brakes, the train itself will stop according to the basic features of it. So it controls the speed of the train, it can control the brakes of the train itself. Further, it can pick up line side signaling, which is good for foggy and high speed, what we call as journey, and what we call as high speed trains are based on this type of system itself. You can't just have the driver look at the signal at a very high speed. Further, there's a principle of it updates the movement of the train on the track itself. If you are crossing a LC gate, which is a locomotive gate, which is what we call as fatak, what happens is it will auto whistle in that regard. And further, collision avoidance if both on the same track or there is something imminent vis-a-vis which is going to happen on the same track itself. And it also has an SOS feature. So this is basically Kavach for you. Kavach that way is quite revolutionary and can be very, very interesting and important. The videos which you see of Kavach are also quite interesting, that this system is the future, making sure that train collisions are the thing of the past. So the topic or the article itself deals with a separate issue altogether, but for that you needed some context. So I have given you the context with regards to what is Kavach and what is the components of Kavach. Now, the article argues on an average 80 people are dying because of certain train accidents. 2013 there was a spike because of the Orissa accident itself, and in 2014 till now we already have 10 people dead because of the Kanchenjunga Express accident. Now in this context, everybody is saying that why is that Kavach is not being applied to trains, and very critical lines, for example, the Kanchenjunga Express was on a very critical line which is connecting through the Chicken's Neck, the mainland India to northeast. So there is economic loss, there's loss of human life. Why can't we have Kavach on every train? That's a very standard thing which we can argue. Now people argue that it is the money which is the problem. It is the capital expenditure which is the problem. The amount of money which is needed to be pushed into Kavach on every 15,200 different locomotives we have, diesel and electric, the amount of money is something very, very big and cannot be expected in 1 year. So what this article actually does is it breaks down the investment. This is a very interesting point. You don't have to learn this, but a very interesting point. It says that it takes 50 lakh rupees per kilometer on the track side and at the station side to develop or to have Kavach on every line, and the unit which goes into the locomotive is 70 lakh rupees. Now based on the fact that India has operationally 68,000 kilometers of track, the amount which is needed is close to 34,000 to 35,000 crores to make Kavach standard on every track. And at the locomotive side, because there are 15,200 engines, 10,000 crores is needed. Now, cumulatively, to equip every train in India and every track in India with Kavach, you need close to 45,000 crores. Now, this amount seems to be very, very big. And is actually a very major investment which the railways would have to make. However, the article argues that because the retrofitting of the locomotives and the tracks cannot be done in a year, this can only be done in a 10-year cycle. It has already been 8 years for Kavach to be introduced, properly 4 to 5 years, but the concept has been there for the past 8 years. So if we take 10-year period, it becomes 4,500 crore a year. Now, if you look at the railway budget, which is as of right now at 2,52,000 crores for capital expenditure, and let us assume that it remains at the same level for the next 2 to 3 or 5 years, the argument which the article is making is that the total investment year on year for the next 10 years is going to be just 2 to 3% of the budget. of that year. Now this makes us beg to understand and differ, wherein can't the railways push 2 to 3% of capital expenditure budget on a system which can save lives? And therein lies the topic itself, which is, it says how lack of focus and not finance is leading to sluggish Kavach deployment. The argument which is being made as of right now is that it is not that the railways do not have the money to push in Kavach. It is not that we can't develop all of this in the railways itself. It is the focus of the railways which is not into deploying it in a systematic manner. There are delays. There's a lot of trials which have already been done. Everything has been proven. It's a proven technology. Still, there's a lot of deliberation which is happening, which is red tapeism within railways itself. So the idea which this article is actually pushing is a very interesting one, that as of right now, only 1465 railway kilometers has been covered through Kavach till 2024 February. Now, if we go by the fact that we need 50 lakhs and 70 lakhs for loco and track, and we have 68,000 and 15,000 engines, and total expenditure 45,000 crores in that sense. At the pace we are going, it will take 46 years to get all tracks the Kavach and 100 years for all the engines to have the Kavach system itself. And the required pace is 6 times higher than what is being pushed right now. And this is where the article becomes extremely invaluable. It argues that if we are arguing that it is the money, it is the capital which is the problem, there is no issue. Because the Kavach expenditure is not more than 2 to 3% of the railway budget when it comes to capital expenditure. So why is that we can't expedite this and in the next 10 years have Kavach in every locomotive and track system, signaling system? So what is the purpose of this article in your larger preparation? As much as it is interesting, what is the purpose? The purpose of this article for your mains answer is to argue in the examination that it is not capital expenditure, it is not the budgetary aspect, it is about political will and it is about the will of the institution itself. Railways, the Indian Railways have to take up this on a mission mode, which has happened just recently. The railway minister has argued that on mission mode we will put in the Kavach system in all the different sectors. But the argument is that what is this mission mode? What is the quantum of that mission mode? And this is the argument: 68,000 kilometers per year, say 6,800 kilometers per year and 1,500 locomotives a year has to be done. Only then by 2034 we will have the whole system in place. And therefore, there needs to be both political will, and that is the argument here. What is the way forward here? There has to be both political will and administrative will to focus on Kavach, because this is revolutionary technology. And it shouldn't be that by the time we reach 2034, this technology itself becomes obsolete. So the argument is that once you deploy it, it has to be upgraded. It can't be that by 2040 we have Kavach and there's a better technology for Kavach and there's a further expenditure needed. So there needs to be focus, there needs to be a certain push for the whole system in that regard. Now, how can the UPSC ask you a question about this? Like this: the availability of a proven technology such as Kavach has not necessarily reduced the number of accidents in the recent past. In light of the above statement, discuss the issues in its implementation. This is a very realistic question. You can get it in GS paper 3. And you should make sure that you're writing answers about these type of topics. This is where current affairs plus static, because now Kavach has become static itself, come together. One of you argued that what should be the structure, I should also tell in the session. So I'll do that. The structure, as always, is the same, which is introduction, body, conclusion. Don't write it in the examination. However, in the introduction, you can talk about the Odisha and the Kanchenjunga accident, creating the context, which is the current affairs part. And thereafter, in the body, divide into two parts. First, explain to them what is the Kavach system, what is the concept of Kavach, and how it prevents train collisions. And in the second part, you can talk about first the budgetary constraint, which is talked about. However, then counter argue to say that it is not just the budgetary constraint because it's 2 to 3%, and it is rather the administrative will and the focus of the railways, which is not on Kavach itself. And therefore, first the issue of finances, then the issue of focus, then the issue of obsolete technology and technological upgradations. That is equally important in that regard, and conclude by arguing that this needs to be done on a mission mode, which the government of India has already identified. Please understand that you are writing for UPSC, so it can't be purely negative argument. It has to be balanced, it has to be midway. So you can't just say that everything is bad or everything is good. Argue that the government has identified it and they are doing it. This is how you approach a question where there's a little bit of criticism which is to be offered, and therefore they are asking you to discuss, not critically analyze, discuss. So discuss the problems of implementation. With this, let's move to the second article, which is based on Maharashtra and Maharashtra's water crisis. Just yesterday, the Maharashtra government has declared the Marathwada area as a drought area, and it is drought prone, but it has now been declared as a drought hit area in that regard. And now this raises the question, why is that a certain part of peninsular India, a very specific sector in peninsular India of northern Karnataka, of Maharashtra, certain parts of Rayalaseema, certain parts of Telangana, why do they face drought? And is it only geography, or is it more than that? Is it more than that? This is where you have two types of arguments which will go in. There could be geographical and ecological factors, and there could also be man-made factors in that regard. So, the first thing which automatically comes to focus is that when you look at Maharashtra and look at the Marathwada area, which is central Maharashtra, the first reason it actually faces a drought is it is in the rain shadow area of the Indian monsoon when it hits the Western Ghats. When it hits the Western Ghats, it's in the rain shadow area. What is rain shadow? See, when moisture-laden clouds start to ascend or start to go up a mountain or any form of elevation, they tend to give precipitation on the side they are ascending to. From the side they go up or they climb. What happens is by the time they reach the peak and descend on the leeward side, what happens is they lose all the moisture. An argument for this is that when the Indian monsoon hits the Western Ghats, on this side, which is the windward side, you get close to 1200 millimeters of rain, can be close to 1100 to 1200 millimeters. But once it crosses over the Western Ghats, this goes to 600 to 500 millimeters. So you can see there's a half of exactly what is happening on the other side. That is why the concept of windward side and leeward side. So Marathwada sector is actually in the leeward side of the Western Ghats, and therefore it is the rain shadow side. Basically, rain or precipitation does not reach to the Marathwada sector, and this is a geographical constraint or a feature of this sector that it will not get rain mostly in the monsoonal section. It will maybe receive some rain in the retreating monsoon in the November-December period, October-November-December period, not during the June-July sector. So on the Western Ghat windward side, which is when it enters from this sector, on the coastal sector, you will get a lot of rain, and that is the whole story, that one part of Maharashtra is flooded. On the other hand, the other part of Maharashtra is in drought. This is the two contrasting images which we are seeing. And the leeward side, there is drought. So this is the first reason which automatically comes out of the geographical space of why Marathwada is facing a problem. So this gives us a chance to discuss the static concept of rain shadow. The second is based on the concept of soil. This is again a geographical or ecological factor, which is that the Marathwada area has what is called as the black soil, but the clayey black soil. Now, according to hydrological porosity or what we call as water absorbing capacity of the soil, black soil is not good specifically of Marathwada. What happens is this soil, it is very fertile, it holds the moisture well, but it does not allow infiltration, which is that it does not add to the ground water resources, because either it will stagnate or it will waterlog itself. It will take a lot of time for downward filtration or percolation into the groundwater in that regard. That is why most of the water is either washed away along with soil erosion, or there is a need to have dams, because you have to collect the washed away water, which is called the fresh water, which is on the surface. It goes down the what we call as gradient, picks up soil erosion, picks up the soil and silt also, and therefore in Maharashtra a very important role is played by dams, which basically check dams which take this water and collect it. Now, this is again a geographical factor, that the black soil of Maharashtra does not allow for replenishing the groundwater resources quickly. It will happen slowly, but not, for example, as good or quickly in the red soil, or for example in the alluvial soil. Black soil tends to hold the moisture for much longer and percolation rate is lower. So I can argue that the second reason is also geographical. So this is also good. Now, what is the answer to these issues? If you have soil which does not allow for percolation, there's problem of what we call as groundwater resources, and there is also an issue of geography. You tend to go for irrigation. And this is where Maharashtra has created a crisis for itself through its crop choice. See, sugarcane only covers 4% of Maharashtra's land area as a crop, but uses 61% of all irrigation. Therefore, in the Maharashtra sector, sugarcane is not a suited crop. Firstly, sugarcane is a very thirsty crop. If you look at the billions of cubic meters water is needed through irrigation, 17.4 billion cubic meters is needed. Vis-a-vis, for example, jowar, fruits or cotton, it is 17 times higher than even pulses, and at least 6 times higher or 8 times higher than rice. So a food crop is using 2 billion cubic meters. This is using 17.4 billion cubic meters. You don't have to learn this obviously, but the idea is that the crop choice is wrong, wherein 4% of land area, 61% of irrigation resources. This is where Maharashtra government and the Maharashtra administration has to push the farmers away from sugar cultivation and sugarcane cultivation, and therefore go towards oil seeds or what we call as drought plants or drought plants, which is, for example, jowar, bajra, millets. Even rice and wheat in this sector is sustainable. And therefore, if they have to choose a cash crop over a cash crop, go for cotton. Go for cotton. And see, between 1970 to 2011, the amount of water being used by sugarcane and the quantum is increasing. Therefore, there are two ecological factors, but one very dangerous precedence which has been created in Maharashtra, which is sugarcane. And sugarcane is actually wreaking havoc not just in Maharashtra, in certain parts of Tamil Nadu, in certain parts of Karnataka, or ironically northern Karnataka again sugarcane cultivation, in Rayalaseema, in Telangana, in Gujarat. Ironically, wherever there's a water crisis, because sugarcane outcome or output is good but very thirsty, needs water along the whole year itself, and the remuneration, which is the income which is generated out of sugarcane is good. That is why the farmers are choosing sugarcane over other crops. So either the government has to disincentivize sugarcane or has to incentivize in these sectors the crops which are much more sustainable. The sustainability of the crop is more important, and therefore 3 factors we've decided or we have identified which help in understanding why the Marathwada sector is facing such a big water crisis. Now in UPSC you don't leave it here. You have to understand the way forward also. Now how do we make sure that we come out of this crisis? First is we need better irrigation technology which is water efficient. For example, there is a new trend which has emerged that in irrigation channels they are putting in solar panels on the top so that it reduces the rate of evaporation, so the water volume does not reduce as it goes down the stream itself. Second, drought resistant crop. This is very, very, very important because this needs to be a new government policy that we will encourage crops which use less water. You also have to diversify the livelihood of the people. If everybody is based on agriculture, it will lead to a lot of crises. So there needs to be animal husbandry, there needs to be encouragement of better livelihood also. However, what the government can do is it can also have watershed management schemes which will help in better contour trenches, what we call as earthen bunds, gully plugs, or even what we call as check dams. The argument is if we can link this up with Mahatma Gandhi MG Narega, which is we can have people work on these contour trenches or gully bunds or gully plugs or dams, which is not proper dams but just check dams. This could help in saving the water and replenishing the water, groundwater resources also. So please do understand before we move to the next topic, 3 factors. 1 is the rain shadow, 2nd the soil, but 3rd, which is created by us, which is the choice of the crops itself. And how do we come out of it? This is what will help you in the examination, wherein water efficiency, better livelihood, and the concept of drought resistant crops. Now how will UPSC ask a question out of this sector? Like this: the severe water crisis in peninsular India is a combination of geography, topography, cropping pattern and soil. Elucidate. This is a beautiful question for GS paper 1 or GS paper 3. For the geography section of GS paper 1, or you can get it as a question on environment. Please do attempt this question. This is very, very what we call as it will check how you structure your answer. So in the introduction, body, conclusion, what you do basically is in the introduction you have to talk about the present situation. In most of the current affairs questions, the current affair part goes into the introduction, and thereafter in the body you would have to talk about factors, geographical factors, topographical factors, which is leeward side, rain shadow side. Then you have to talk about soil, so you'll add the 3rd point, soil. Then you will talk about the topography, which is that because of the soil and the gradient in this sector, water runs off. But then you have to talk about cropping pattern, which is sugarcane, and then conclude by saying whatever points we made here, which is that this is the way forward for Maharashtra to come out of a water crisis in that sense. Very interesting article, very well written, and for a UPSC aspirant, extremely critical. For everybody who's preparing for mains, keep these things in focus. These points can be put in for any water crisis. So use these generic points for your answer in that sense. With this, let's move to a very contagious scheme has been in the news, which is Agnipath or Agniveer. Now this has a lot of political backstory to it also. A lot of conversation is happening in the political space with regards to Agniveer, its revamping, its scrapping, and Agnipath scheme in that sense. Now, as a UPSC aspirant, we need to know 3 things about this. First, what is the scheme? What are the features? And political recommendations are irrelevant to us as of right now. What are the recommendations of the Indian Armed Forces is more important. A politician can ask for anything, but if the Chief of Army Staff is saying, yes, we need this type of recommendation, that is the type of recommendation you add into your answer. Not political recommendations, but institutional recommendations. So first, let's try to understand what is this contagious scheme. So Agnipath scheme is a way of actually recruiting but also giving employment to the youth of India. So, as of right now, the concept is that under Agnipath scheme, between the age of 17.5 and 21 years, a Agniveer can enter into either of the services, which is Air Force, Navy or Army. Army takes a major chunk, 40,000 every year. For 4 years, they will have what is called as temporary service. Within the first year, they'll be trained, and in the next 3 years, they will be deployed in certain parts of India as Agniveers, as temporary soldiers. I'm not saying permanent because the nature of the engagement with the army itself is temporary. Now, in the first 3 years, they will be given a package close to 5 lakh rupees, 4.76 lakhs. And in the last year, the 4th year, they will be given 6.92 lakhs. However, out of this money, a certain corpus is created, which is called the Seva Nidhi package, which is a Seva Nidhi package is created. Out of that 4 lakh rupees, close to 2 lakh rupees is pushed into that corpus. And when you are released, if you are released, meaning out of the 100% people, Agniveers which were there, 25% based on their performance are recommended to be inducted permanently into the army, and 75% of them are released. The 75% released get 11.71 lakh rupees tax-free as a one-time transfer from the government, where the Agniveer contributed and the government also contributed. There's an insurance cover of 48 lakh rupees, and you will get a skill certificate if you want from the army. And during these 4 years, you can also get a 12th class certificate or a BA bachelor's certificate in that regard. Now, the Agniveer is eligible to meet a lot of different criterias, which is medical eligibility, and he has to go through this 4-year service without fail, training period also included, and 25% made into regular cadre, and 30% put into the corpus fund itself, one-time Seva Nidhi package. So therefore, you have 4 years employment also, certain amount of money also coming in, and you also get one-time close to 11 lakh rupees, and the government will also try to give you certificates, and your employment in the real world outside the army will also be facilitated because you are an ex-Agniveer or an Agniveer for the past 4 years. Now, the calculation of this scheme is quite interesting, how this corpus of 11 lakh rupees is created vis-a-vis their first salary starts at 30,000, 33,000, 36,000 and 40,000, but in hand is lower. Rather, a certain corpus, 30% of that fund is pushed into this fund, which is 5 lakh will be contributed by the Agniveer, 5 lakh the government will contribute, and after 4 years exit, you will get 11 lakh rupees in your hand. Further, as of right now, 40,000 Agniveers are being taken into the army, 3,000 in Navy and Air Force, and you can get a skill certificate along with a bachelor's or a 12th class certificate if you want. Now, this is the basic concept, which is 4 years, 3 years certain package, 4th year different package, but 100 people if they go in, only 25 will get regular service, 75 will be left. Now, basically at the age of either 21, 22 or 25, you are now into again the job market, having served in the army. The question is, will the Agniveers, ex-Agniveers, get employment within the sector of different parts of the economy once they come out of the army? Because they have a very specific skill set and they have a very specific training which may be or may not be relevant in the real world. So the question, the criticism has been, why only 25%? Why only 25%? Why cannot be it 50%, 75%? As it is, there's a crisis. I'm going to talk about that. And second is that the packages are extremely low. The packages are extremely low, and for working for 4 years, 10 lakh rupees is not a big amount with regards to inflation, and these salaries are not inflation adjusted. There's no DA, there's no permanency, there's no canteen services, there is no what we call as medical services. They get a little bit of medical attention in certain contexts. They have a insurance of 48 lakh rupees, but all the benefits which other soldiers have, regular full-time soldiers, Agniveers don't have. So it's basically like a contractualization. I've talked about it previously also. This is like the informalization of the army itself. That you create a permanent soldier and then you create a temporary soldier, and this temporary soldier has certain benefits, and these benefits are way less or proportionally less to what the regular soldier has, and it is not a permanent employment, and you have to perform to become permanent. Now, the question is, why was there a need for the Agnipath or Agniveer scheme? And the argument which has been pushed by the government is, there's a recruitment crisis and deficit. What the Army and the Air Force and Navy argued was, because of COVID-19, for 2.5 years, no recruitment happened. On the other hand, 60,000 officers, soldiers, and specifically Agniveer targets the below officer rank cadre in that regard. 60,000 soldiers retire and only 40,000 soldiers get recruited every year. And therefore, 20,000 different soldiers in different ages is needed to fill up this deficit. Now, the argument was that Agniveer is going to be that surplus which will fill up the deficit as of right now when it comes to the scheme or when it comes to the army. But the problem is still not enough. It is still not enough. And herein comes the recommendation or what the armed forces themselves are saying. And is there a need to revamp? The government is saying that we need a clause by clause reconsideration of Agniveer. But let's see what the forces are arguing. The forces or the Army, the Navy and the Air Force is saying, firstly, let's do one thing. Let's make it 50% of the Agniveers, not 25%. Because as it is, the intake numbers are very low and there is a need for better recruitment and further recruitment. If we are training them, why can't we have 50% of the, out of those 100 Agniveers, why can't 50 join only 25? Why this number of 25%? Why not 50? At least 50% should be given a certain specific recruitment, permanent recruitment into the Army, Air Force or Navy. This is very, very important. That way, that the armed forces themselves are saying, please increase the intake from temporary to permanent, from Agniveer to proper soldier. Thereafter, the second is a very interesting one. Navy and Air Force is saying that we just don't need soldiers. We need technically classified and qualified individuals also. So increase the age from just 17 to 21 to 21 to 23. So that we can also get what we call as BTECs or technically qualified individuals who can enter into the services through this. So for example, you did your BTech and then you get a chance to join the Agniveer program in that regard. As of right now, you can't enter. You can get a degree within the Agniveer scheme, but not outside it because you will cross the age itself. And therefore, these two recommendations that ways are quite logical and make a lot of sense also. Now, the political rhetoric is on scrapping, doing this and that. That is irrelevant to a UPSC aspirant. What is more important is how do you present this into the paper and what can be the question which can be asked for the examination. Here, you can get a question like this. The Agnipath scheme needs to be revamped and realigned with India's defense needs and recruitment demand. Do you agree? Now, in a do you agree question or a comment question, they are asking you your opinion. But please do check the tone of the question. The tone of the question is positive, that there is a need to revamp and realign. So you can't disagree fully with it. So you can, in the introduction, talk about the current affairs, which is a lot of political and social, what we call as civil society conversation about Agniveer. In the body, you can talk about what is the scheme and then what are the forces recommendations, which is revamping and realignment. And in the conclusion, you can add 1 point of what we call as if you want to add a certain counter argument that it increases the expenditure of the government, you can add that, but you have to go with the tone of the question. The tone of the question is also very important to be picked up by an aspirant. Half of the question can be answered with good marks if the student or the aspirant understands the tone of the question. A lot of students, what they do is the tone of the question is positive, they write a negative question, a negative answer. That is not how you see it. If the examiner is asking you in a positive light that the Agnipath scheme needs to be revamped and realigned with India's defense need and recruitment demands, you basically need to understand this is a positive one. I'll give you a negative question also in the same topic. This is a positive question. It is asking for realignment and revamping. You can say the question could be, for example, the Agnipath scheme is geared towards India's defense needs and its revamping may lead to a good scheme becoming distorted. Do you agree? Now what it is saying is, it is saying that the Agnipath scheme is actually good. We don't need to do it because don't need to revamp it, it will distort. So in this type of a question, this you support the argument, or in that type of question you defend the Agnipath scheme. This is the beauty of mains answer writing, that you have to pick up the tone of the examiner. Here you talk about revamping and realignment. Here you rather talk about how the scheme is good enough as it is. Little bit of changes can be done. So again, through these sessions, through CNA, we are trying to push in mains answer writing understanding so that everybody who is preparing for, every candidate who is expecting to clear the prelims this year, you need to take these things into account so that you understand the tone of the question. These are the nitty-gritties, the smaller points which you need to know about answer writing. With this, let's move to a very interesting article again based on national security strategy. Now, according to the article, as of right now, India is one of those countries when it comes to defense power, which has a lot of security threats. When it comes to national security, I think I do not need to reiterate or even say that on both sides of our border, we have irritants from Pakistan to China. And when it comes to our national security, we are that very rare brand of countries which does not have an NSS, which is National Security Strategy, which is a policy document which basically sets the agenda. The argument which the article, the author is saying is that we have what is called as a piecemeal approach, which is case by case approach. We have sometimes a haphazard approach when it comes to defense decisions and defense strategies. And we have very short-term targets. And even if there are long-term targets, they are not properly synchronized with the political will. See, governments will change, their agendas will change, and their orientations will change. And in the same context, when it comes to national security, the government agenda keeps on changing. Therefore, we are in sometimes rudderless or directionless. We are directionless. Like a UPSC aspirant who prepares himself, you are preparing everything, but piecemeal approach, you don't know what is the right direction to go to A to B or B to A. Rather, you do trial and error. That is what we also do. We have a lot of questions which we have to answer. And national security is that area where you need consistency. And the US, China, and a lot of the EU partners, the NATO, all have national security strategies. What is their short-term target? What is their long-term target? Now, this article gives you the reasons why India should have national security strategy, which is what is the point of having NSS. This is why this article is invaluable to us, because it gives us the story of NSS. Why NSS is basically the 5 arguments have been made why we should have a national security strategy, a very important terminology which has been introduced and we should consider it. The first argument why India should have an NSS is the concept that when you have an NSS, which is National Security Strategy, you have to do a comprehensive audit of national threats and security challenges. Basically, a strategic assessment is something which India would be forced to take, and this may allow us to create our priority areas and non-priority areas. So it is saying that just by having NSS, what happens is the comprehensive strategic assessment or audit of our national security, national challenges and national threats will allow us to have a clearer picture of what is actually a proper threat, though India has no issue with regards to understanding that Pakistan, China is, but there could also be other issues, for example, insurgency. Second, it argues that it will allow us to have a long-term comprehensive strategy. This is where India is lacking as of right now, according to the author, which is that there is short-term vision, maybe 5 years, but there's no long-term vision that what India needs to achieve after 30 years or 40 years. What is the target when we reach 2040? That has not been talked about, and that is something where we need a long-term comprehensive strategy. The third, which is argued for, is the concept of optics. Through the national security strategy, we can have a policy document which is signaling to the friends and foes what is India's larger demand and expectation from the geopolitics, wherein if we are saying that we will have better strategic partnership, more defense cooperation, it shows our allies that we are ready to engage more with them. On the other hand, to the foes, that India is trying to develop multilateral defense institutions. And therefore, the optics of it is that we have a policy document which in a way is like a preamble to our national security challenges, national security strategies. Fourth is, why does India need an NSS? Is the idea that this will bring all the governments in sync, which is synchronization of government activities and agendas. In the next 30 years, maybe 5 to 6 governments come through. However, their agendas may keep on changing, but they have to be in sync with regards to their demands and with regards to their agenda. At least the armed forces are in sync with what is needed and what is the vision. So this allows every new government coming through to either align with the agenda or alter it as per its needs, but at least the long-term agenda remains the same. And fifth, and equally important, argued by the article, is accountability. The accountability of not meeting targets, of not having projects, or for example, if there's a breach, if there are new challenges emerging, who is responsible for it? Is it the government? Is it the defense forces? Is it the administration? Where does the accountability lie for lapses in national security? So therefore, from having a comprehensive audit which gives us a clearer picture to comprehensive strategy for long term, optics and government agenda synced in, accountability and transparency in the governmental decisions, and our defense strategy comes through. Now, how serious is the government to consider NSS is a different issue altogether. But this article argues for one, and this is the type of question which can come in the examination, a hypothetical question. India needs a national security strategy in light of the geopolitical climate. Comment. Here your comment is basically it is needed. Why is it needed? You can add the 5 points. In the conclusion, you can say that the government should consider this scheme in that regard and this strategy in that regard. However, we leave it to the judgment of the government, the NSA and the armed forces to actually create it. You can't force the government. It's a hypothetical question. It's a prospective question. It's a normative question. So you develop it like that in that regard. Okay, with this, a small discussion, but a very interesting one for Sikkim in that sense. The Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, urban, launched in 2015, now close to closing 10 years. This scheme has been in the news now in a series also. The Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Rural was one of the things which was referred to in the Panchayat series also. The idea is that the Pakka house will be given to all eligible urban households if they are slum dwellers or based on income criteria, which is poor or middle income groups, slum dwelling and Pakka houses. All eligible urban households will get it based on a certain scheme. But the problem which the Urban Affairs Ministry has pointed out is there are delays. And this is where, and this is a very small, simple article, this is where the biggest weakness of the schemes comes through, which is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban has been facing multiple delays in that sense, and therefore what is need of the hour as of right now is speeding up and systematizing the allocation, because though the scheme has provided a lot of close to 44,000 dwelling units in different sectors, and further what we call as 5 lakh estimated under construction, and as of right now 44,000 to be given within this year itself. The idea is it has been an Achilles heel of the government to implement it systematically. We have the data, we have everything what we need, however we are not able to implement it in the right way. This is the only idea which this article is arguing about, which is affordable housing schemes need revamping. It is the delays which is the problem. We will speed it up and expedite it according to the states itself. We will create incentives for the state to push this further, and therefore most probably we will see a new version of this scheme very soon. So we have to look out for it. Nothing very critical in that regards with regards to our preparation. Okay. Now before I move to the next article, remember that there's a workshop. There's a workshop by Sarmat sir on June 30th, and this workshop is going to deal with a very important aspect of your preparation, which is comprehensive preparation strategy for beginners. This is going to be a very, very important one for you, wherein at 11 a.m. on June 30th, there will be an online workshop. The link to this is given in the description box. And remember, it is for beginners, so this can be a make or break for you. So do remember, 30th June, 11 a.m. workshop, comprehensive preparation strategy for beginners by Sarmat sir himself. So do make sure that you register for it. Link is given in the description box. Okay. With this, we come to a feature which I include in my lectures, which is from the archives. Now, this article is 50 years ago, June 26th, 1974. So on 26th June 1974, there was a very interesting article in the Hindu newspaper. And that article dealt with the constitution, new constitution being implemented in Sikkim, and the Sikkim ruler coming, which is Chogyal Namgyal, coming to Delhi with a lot of grievances with regards to the constitution itself, the delay in applying it to Sikkim, and therefore this is a post-independence area. This is basically a post-independence area, wherein post-independence as part of your history, there's a lot of question with regards to princely states and integration and reintegration of princely states. So Sikkim is a very interesting case, and through this article I want to revise the static portion with you, which is the idea of Sikkim ruler and what is the issue with Sikkim at that point of time. Ironically, within the next year itself, by 1975, April, Sikkim will become a part of India, but what was the status previously is equally important, and this is an invaluable opportunity for us to discuss something which would have been done in class, but because it is in the news, from the archives, that way becomes important. So it is the 50th anniversary in a way, the idea of the constitutional monarchy coming to Sikkim. So let's talk about that timeline. I have an infographic for that. So basically we can just go through it. Now, before I talk about Sikkim, please understand this point. In 1947, now pay attention, I'm going to the static, pure, modern India I'm discussing with you, then we'll talk about Sikkim. In 1947, on 15th August 1947, when the India Independence Act came into effect, which created the two dominions of India and Pakistan, there was a catch. The catch was that since the Government of India Act 1935, you can argue since Government of India Act or Government of India Act for Good Government in India 1858, there were three parts to the British India in the Indian subcontinent, or two major parts. See, since the inauguration of paramountcy, which is the concept of the suzerainty of the British and the Queen and the King being accepted by all Indian rulers, the idea was when you talk about British India, there were 11 provinces. There were 11 provinces, which if you put it on the map itself, the North Western Frontier Province, Sindh, a new one which was created through 1935 Act, then Punjab, then the Bombay sector, then the Madras Presidency, then you have a 3-4 together here, which is Central Provinces, United Provinces, the Bengal sector, then you have Bihar, and then you have Orissa. The idea, and then you have the Burma was removed 1935. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and Assam as the whole of the northeast sector as the 11th one. Now, this is basically British India. This came under the Governor General and Viceroy. Along with that, you also had one more zone which came under the Governor General and Viceroy. Small units, specifically the most important one being Delhi. They are called Chief Commissioners Area. Chief Commissioners Area. Basically, this is the predecessor to the UT concept itself. But British India basically included these, which is the 11 provinces plus the Chief Commissioner area. However, they only comprise of 2/3 of the land area of India, or 3 out of 4 Indians, and one part which had been more or less autonomous was the princely states, which is the Jammu and Kashmir sector, for example, the whole of Rajputana sector, Hyderabad, Travancore, the smaller states. 565 such princely states existed. 565 princely states existed. They were 1/3 of India's land area, and 1 out of every 4 Indian was under the princely states. So if you actually take this map together, you can see I've basically made the outline of India in that sense, and therefore this is what is India at this point of time. British India, 11 provinces plus Chief Commissioners area, 1/3 565 princely states in that sense. Now, when the Government of India Act or the Indian Independence Act 1947 comes into effect, what is ironic is that it only applies to these 11 provinces and the Chief Commissioners area, not to the princely states. For them, it is a dissolution of paramountcy, and the British residents were the supreme, with the Queen directly dealing with them, the Governor General Viceroy having no power over them. The idea was that these princely states had 3 options in front of them: either become free, either join India, or either join Pakistan. Now, 565 units are a lot of units. These political units could pull India apart, and it is then the task of the Iron Man of India and the person who is representing the Statue of Unity It is Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel who has been given the task along with VP Menon, the IS officer who was involved, the secretary to the States Department. They are given the task to integrate these 565 princely states. The British had tried it once through the All India Federation in 1935. That came in this year's paper also. Never came into existence. But now 565 different princely states have to be dealt with. 4 turned out to be tricky, which is Junagadh, Kashmir, Hyderabad and Jodhpur. That's a separate story altogether. We discussed it in class just recently. But out of that 565 princely states, there was one unit which is called Sikkim. Now Sikkim was a princely state, had basically become a protectorate type of princely state under the British itself, and a story starts from there. That it is a British dependency similar to a princely state before independence, and once independence is given to India in 1947, the rulers who are given the honorary title of Chogyals, they did not want to be part of India. Pakistan was out of the picture itself. Remaining free was problematic for them because they are surrounded by India, China and Nepal and Bhutan. So that way Sikkim is on all 4 sides not very well placed. Therefore, what the Chogyal Namgyal family was there, they go into a standstill agreement with India, and the idea was Sikkim, though independent, will become a protectorate of India. So foreign policy, defense policy and basic law and order, India will manage. It's exactly like paramountcy, and everything else, Sikkim, Chogyals have their own understanding. So for defense, external affairs, communication, law and order, India will take a call from Delhi. However, Sikkim remains a fully autonomous sector. In a way, it is international territory in that regard. Now, between 1950 and 1970s and basically in 60s, Sikkim was, according to Government of India argument and according to Government of India line and what is written in the NCERT also, a lot of spying started to happen through Sikkim vis-a-vis the CIA, which is the American Intelligence Authority, misusing the Sikkim autonomous status or protectorate status. So the CIA used to go to the Sikkim sector, used to spy on China, on India, and therefore it was becoming a national security threat. More than that, within Sikkim itself, there was a movement which was started by the Sikkim Congress that we want to be part of India. Rather than remaining like a protectorate, we want to be part of India. And there was now a tussle within the Sikkim sector between Chogyal Namgyal and Dorji and Sikkim Congress, with they wanting to be part of India. In April of 1973, anti-Chogyal stir broke out and there was demand for elections, and under Indian facilitation, Dorji Chogyal went into an agreement through a constitutional bill through which Chogyal Namgyal or the Sikkim sector was made into constitutional monarchy. This article is actually talking about that negotiation, that how a constitution bill was being talked about, why he had not agreed to it. Last but not the least is, once the elections will be held, it will be seen that most of the people chose the opposition, Chogyal's opposition, and they wanted to be part of India. And therefore, in April 1975, through a plebiscite, through voting, where overwhelming majority of the people from Sikkim said that we want to be part of India, it was inducted as the 22nd state. And since 1994, Pawan Kumar Chamling is the CM. Now, the idea here is Sikkim turned out to be quite tricky. Because this protectorate status itself was something which turned out to be more tricky than signing the instrument of accession. Kashmir got messed up because of the delay in signing of the instrument of accession, which is Jammu and Kashmir, Hari Singh signing it only in October of 1947, not before independence. Junagadh and Hyderabad were basically the politics of Jinnah and Pakistan and a certain lure which was given through. Jodhpur the same. But Sikkim, though we went into a standstill agreement, Nehru honored the internal autonomy of the Chogyals. This only proved, and this is what we actually discuss in class also, which is that in the larger story of Indian reintegration or reorganization, people's action is very, very important. Junagadh, Hyderabad, everywhere, it was the people who actually rose against the rulers to say that we want democracy. And therefore, Sikkim also turned out to be that type of a story. There are multiple versions to this story. We are following what the government of India argues and has argued. But in that sense, protectorate status is a complicated mess which was only sorted out by Indira Gandhi in 1975. So I hope that you like this feature of discussing static through the current affairs part, and this gives me an opportunity to also impart to you the basic contours of static, specifically history. Now, what type of question can come through? As you can see, this creative is behind me. Do register for this. The link is given in the description box. 30th June, 11 a.m. Please do become a part of this session. It is going to be extremely informative, and it is for beginners from scratch, from 0 to 100, how you can clear this examination. Okay, coming back to the slide itself, what is the question which can come in the examination? This is a GS paper 1 question. Let's discuss this question, which is Sikkim's process of integration into India is an example of the complex and delicate process of reorganization and integration of princely states. Comment. Very beautifully made question, which is you can actually understand how it was complex, how it was delicate. You can talk about the strategies were employed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and you can also talk about how Sikkim itself became a complicated story because of the Sikkim Congress, because of the internal reorganization, because of Chogyal's resistance and the constitutional monarchy, and then later integration into India. So I've given you enough backstory and points which you can use for the examination. Thereafter, two very simple, straightforward articles. One is Moody's downgrading of our status when it comes to what is called as Moody's ratings because of a certain concept. So we are now at BAA3. Previously we were at BAA2, but this BAA3 is actually being done specifically because of the vulnerability with water. So there's a very interesting saying nowadays in geopolitics, which is there's a cost of the climate change issue, or there's a cost of climate change. Somehow our rating has now also taken, credit rating has also taken a hit because of the vulnerability of India with regards to water. The argument which has been given by Moody is that out of all G20 countries, India is the most vulnerable to water crisis and water. And therefore, by 2040 and by 2031, the argument is that the per capita water availability will fall to 1367 cubic meters from what already it is 1486, which is very low. And we can see Bangalore, Delhi, multiple cities in India. The first article itself was about this Marathwada sector. We can see that there are multiple places where water is becoming a crisis, and this is now impacting India's credit rating also. So there's a cost to climate change. This is just to update you with regards to the new rating, which is BAA3 stable. However, they have downgraded us specifically because of poor accessibility to water and the water crisis as of right now. With this, let's look at the last topic. Again, an interesting one, which is Chang 6 lunar probe coming back to India. So, coming back to China rather. China's lunar landing module has just recently come back to Earth with lunar rocks. Now, collecting lunar rocks, lunar means moon's rocks, is not something new. The USA did it, the USSR did it during the Cold War period. But there's a very interesting concept here. See, when you look at the moon, there are two sides to the moon, which is near side and far side. Meaning, when you look from the Earth towards the moon, this is the near side, which faces us, and this is the far side. From looking from, for example, Venus or Mercury, you will look at the far side of the moon. Now, the argument which makes, or the reason why this article is important is China has become the first country to get lunar rocks from not the near side of the moon, but the far side of the moon. And this is where this is going to be path breaking, because the near side of the moon is much more smoother, though it has craters. There are a lot of mountains, and the south pole, where we also have landed Chandrayaan-3, the south pole has been a very interesting case of research, and Chang'e-6, now mission successful, can be a path-breaking discovery vis-a-vis the water availability on the moon and the concept of lunar exploration. For you, what is important is Chang'e-6, and though it is China becomes a third country, but it is the first country to get it from the far side, not the third country. Remember this point. It is the first country to get it from the far side of the moon. Previously, USA and USSR have taken it from the what we call as near side. Now, this is the type of question which can come in the examination. We will discuss the answer for this first thing tomorrow, and you will write the answer to this question in the chat box. I will discuss this question tomorrow also, and more than that, we will make this a feature that every day when I come, I will discuss the last day's prelims question in that regard. Consider the following statements. The Chang'e-6 recently completed its mission of collecting rock samples from the near side of the moon. This successful mission makes China the third country after USA and erstwhile USSR to collect lunar rocks. Which of the statements are correct? 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, both, and neither 1 and 2. You have to write the answer in the chat box. And as you know, 5 other questions will also be uploaded to the Telegram channel. So do go check that out also. With this, before I end, just a basic summary of what we've done. Remember, we started with four what we call as reasons why Maharashtra, Marathwada sector is facing drought vis-a-vis geographical factors, rain shadow, soil, and the bad crop choice. Then we tried to also understand Kavach system, wherein Kavach, why is there a delay? It is not finances, it is will, it is the focus of the railways itself. We have discussed also the need for the NSS, which can bring in long-term stability in our strategies itself. We've also discussed the concept of Moody, what we call as downgrading R from BAA2 stable to BAA3 stable just because of water. And we've also discussed Chang'e-6, a new horizon with regards to lunar exploration, and the concept of Sikkim, how it got integrated through the concept of from the archives. With this, I would like to end the session. I will see you tomorrow, same time, with another set of issues. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.